Have you seen? Oh, you probably haven't seen it yet because you're probably all kind of in other stuff. But have you seen Darren Doan's conversation with Doug Wilson?
No, did it just go up?
It just came out. It went up like this morning at 5 something. And he's talking to him about like all of the controversies and everything that's went on in
Yeah.
Moscow and kind of all the things that people want to like kill him for and mad at him for. And bro, it's about a minute and 50 seconds in. I had to pause it. And then I picked it back up and another almost 2 minutes goes by. I remember the time marks because I remember when I stopped it. And it's like a minute and 3 minutes and 41 seconds. And I stopped it again because I had to meditate on the scandal that the gospel was.
Yeah.
And I wasn't ready.
So that's just where he starts out.
He starts out just talking about Sittler's case and situation. Just starts out right there. Just opens up and it just
Got it. Okay.
I mean, it wasn't even like, oh, hey, get ready. Let's talk about a situation that's insane. No, it was just like, so you married a convicted pedophile. Wow. Hey, way to warm up.
Yeah.
Like what?
Oh man.
I
Darren.
like just do not pass go. Don't collect $200. Just go for it. And I was sitting here and I was thinking, and I know whoever hears this, they just have to go. I think the name of his new podcast is "All My Friends Are Heretics."
Okay. Oh, so it's a new podcast.
It's yeah, it's a whole new podcast, and he's basically saying, according to everybody else's standards in the world, you know, the friends and people I hang out with too, everybody else considers these guys heretics.
Got it. Okay.
And I remember when I was first working with Darren, he was like, hey, you know, I want to hang around the heretics. And I'm coming from traditional Reformed evangelicalism, traditional like, Reformed Baptist evangelicalism.
Heretics are bad.
You know that? Right? Like, you don't hang out like heretics, you get rid of.
He's talking like the heretics of the moment. The which is what Luther was in his day and Calvin was in his day. Yeah, I mean he wasn't. It wasn't like they just said, "Oh, thank you so much," right? They tried to murder him.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
but it just got me to thinking. I don't have room. I have sanitized things far more than I probably should have. I don't have room in my theological framework for the scandal of the gospel, and I don't think. As we meditate and think about the gospel, everybody loves proclaiming it until it's time to really rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
And then you got to deal with the scandal of the gospel. And God does something really amazing is he takes and shows you somebody else while showing you yourself.
Right. And it's like, hey, I got a mirror for you. Look at this person that you really don't want God to forgive. There's a mirror.
Hey, David, there's this guy who has one sheep. There's this other guy who has a bunch of sheep. But this guy with a bunch of sheep, he went and took this sheep that was very dear to this one guy. David's furious. Oh,
right.
I'll get him, Lord. I got the sword. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'll get him, Lord. Where is he at? Let me at him. It's you.
It's you. You are the man.
and you read that and be like, "Ooh, God got him. God got him." You know?
Yeah. And you don't realize it's the same God that loves you enough to come after you. Yeah, totally. It's amazing. There's nothing like counseling people to, find out how much you need the gospel,
I don't know, man. It just messed me up when I realized how it was so scandalous because I had my stones and I was ready to go and, we got this. And just looking at God, it's not just enough that he saves us.
Right.
It's not enough that it really isn't. Cause forgiving somebody and just letting them go, people can do that. Right. People can do that. Like people sometimes would be like, okay, like a traffic cop. He can just act like he doesn't see. right? He
Yeah.
can just like, okay, I'll let you go. But God stands there with us because we're righteous now. And he takes all the hits and he treats us like friends
Yeah.
and comes to our rescue and publicly claims this piece of shit.
Right. That's exactly it.
You
And
know, and I'm sitting here saying to myself, it takes a case like that to shake me up, to make me say, forget this dude over here. How do you consider me a friend?
one of the things that I mean that is crazy is the word friend. The older meaning of the word friend is official advisor to the authority, right? So so it's even bigger than just saying like, hey,
Great.
I'm gonna take you on and like keep you around even though you're annoying. And it's like, I'm gonna take you on and you're gonna be my friend, which means you're an official advisor now to the king of the universe, right? That's the kind of, so it's like, tell me what you think I should do, right? That kind of relationship. Now
Here goes some angels.
he
Judge them.
yeah, go ahead and judge them. Like he move and so he pushes us into these positions um by bringing us into the family, and then the spirit of God works on us, works with us, draws us nearer, uh slowly over time changes us so that we begin to take on the family resemblance of the Trinity, of the triune family. And not, and it has nothing to do with the fact that that's what we were on our way to do in the first place. I mean, when God grabbed me, I was an argumentative atheist trying to use my atheism to dislodge people from the faith and get girls to hang out with me. It's like, and God was like, you bing, that. And I was like, of all the people, like, I look back, I'm like, there were plenty of much better people in my high school. I there's I'm the and I was the guy that he pulled out of it all. There's no good explanation. I mean, the arbitrary means by God's will alone, right? That's the it's arbitrary in that sense. It's not arbitrary in the sense that there's no plan, but it's just God's will. And then John Owen, in his book on communion with God, he talks about how and then for Christians, the biggest sin is then to refuse to believe that God loves us. It's
Yep.
like
Yep.
it's we turn back in on ourselves and look at ourselves and say, but I am not particularly lovable. And but that's not what it depends on, right? It depends upon this overflowing love that God has, that it's flows out of his nature as God who is love, and it flows
I,
down onto us, and then we are the beneficiaries.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack. I haven't let that go. I listened to it last night. There's 3 hours. He's only dropped an hour,
Okay.
and I just haven't finished wrestling with. I mean, it breaks me down every time I think about it. I mean, every time I think about the gospel, and I can see it, I'm grateful for it in my own life. But then when God shows me a picture of myself through somebody else who I'm willing, it's just like that story. Like, okay, you've been forgiven, you owed a great amount, a great debt, and then someone that owes you can't forgive. You know,
Right.
you can't. And
Totally.
so it's really hit me just how good the gospel is, and how much of a scandal that I've tried to promote it, like it's like try not to understand just how much of a scandal it is, or refuse to see the scandal that it is. Because a scandal, if somebody steals from an honest man, it's different if somebody has stolen from the very God that gave you the image that you have and has made the universe and has breathed his spirit into you, right? Like that's beyond scandalous, you know. And I'm the realities of that sometimes they hit different when we have to apply it to somebody who we think is worse than us.
Right.
And who we think, right?
Who
And
on the scale that we have decided is a scale that we would rather use than the one that God uses.
yeah, man. So
and here's what drives me. This is what sort of drives me nuts is the Reformed folks of everyone should get this, right? Like this should be right up our alley. We believe in total depravity. We believe in I have a friend who we were doing door-to-door evangelism, and somebody asked him about, well, you know, what about babies? And he said the only reason that babies don't come out giving you the finger is a lack of manual dexterity. I was like, dang, that's really good. And it's not like we went wrong at some point, right? Like we went wrong at the very beginning in the garden, and we have continued to go wrong. We continue adding to it, and God's love and his grace continues overcoming the darkness, right? And it's not like there was a certain amount and we keep trying to add to it, and his grace still keeps outpacing and outflanking and outrunning the darkness and the sin. And then we look at somebody else askance and say, but that dude, no way, that dude is, you know, gonna
there's a friend of mine told me about
we're ridiculous.
No, and I think that this is maybe what I'm getting at is like, you know, I don't know if we preach the scandal of the gospel as much as we should, like the scandal of it. We should be sitting in churches on Sunday and thinking like, God can't save that person. Like that person, like you can't save him, right? Like, no, Lord. That's how we should feel. I mean, because if we understand the scandal of it's like, no, don't save that person, Jesus. You can't save him. You can save everybody else, but not that person. It's like that person's you. When we preach there was this guy, my buddy Rick Appleton, he used to say, he's like, people are fine preaching thou shalt not steal. Everybody is like, yes, amen, preaching don't steal. And there was this logging company that there would be a river that they had all their different logging companies up and down this river. And some logging companies at the top of the river would send their logs down and they would burn and imprint their logo of that this is their log that they chopped. And, you know, so when it got down to the end of the river where everybody can grab their stuff, they would know which ones were theirs. And so logging companies would print their stamps on the logs that they cut down. Some logging companies, as it was coming down, would chop off the edge where that stamp was and then restamp it with their own stuff. And all these people went to the same church. So, you know, preaching thou shalt not steal is like, everybody's like, yes, amen. We agree with you, preacher. Don't steal. Stealing is wrong. He's like, but when you start preaching, thou shalt not cut off thy neighbor's end of the log to make it thine own.
Right.
Everybody's like, whoa.
Yeah, well, that's
don't
the way
get
it's
the
always
gospel
been
into
done.
our business.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That's how we do it. Like that's just American.
Hey, what, you opposed to tradition? That's our that's
and so there comes a point where our preaching and our theology has to actually touch down in reality so that people can connect the two and be like, oh, okay.
yeah.
And because you can preach one thing where it's like, or you can talk in a one way, when one language about everything that's general. Hey, murder's wrong. Absolutely. Hey, you don't have an abortion. That's murder. Like you're killing another human being. You don't do that. Whoa, 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 whoa. That's different.
Right. One of the things that's really interesting, you know, is Reformed pastors have a temptation to preach about the gospel rather than preach the gospel. right? To talk about what it is that God has done rather than say God has done this, right? Say we want to talk about the controversies, and I've seen solid reformed pastors stand up and tell you all of the things that baptism doesn't do, right? You here's 6 things that people have said baptism does that it doesn't do, and then say, all right, now we're going to baptize this person. You're like, wait, you spend your time, why don't you tell us what, just tell us the gospel, right? Tell us what, or even what you think baptism does do. And sometimes they don't think it does anything. So, but that's a different thing altogether. But like standing up and telling me all of the errors that have been made about the gospel, and telling me people that say this is a false gospel, that's a false gospel, is not the same thing as preaching the good news. And I've talked to Reformed pastors that they'll say, I can't just tell a person that God loves them because I don't know the whole story. Right? I don't know. Are they going to stay? Are they going to go? And then when somebody walks away, you've been teaching them to doubt for years, and because you're not sure if the gospel applies to them, um, it is a I think we've taken the gospel and we've replanted the facts of the case into a different metaphysic, so in which God doesn't, where the gospel is some sort of heavenly reality and it doesn't actually touch down for the people right in front of us or for ourselves often. I mean, maybe it does when we're first converted, but then we talk ourselves out of a continued dependence upon the gospel into Phariseeism or into existential doubt, all sorts of things. But I remember just talking to a group of older men that had all gotten saved during the Jesus People movement, right? And they said they were like, it's crazy when you look back. A lot of the pastors, they were barely holding on, living in sin. There are all sorts of things, but they would come up to hippies, groups of hippies, and they would say, Jesus died so that your sins could be forgiven. And these hippies would break down and convert, right? And it's like they weren't preaching something they crazy, high theology, anything, right? But they were just simply declaring straightforward, Jesus died on the cross for you. And people, for me, oh, right. And they believe it and they get saved. And 30 years later, they're like, yeah, the guy's theology was terrible. I know that now. His theology was whack, but he preached the gospel, and the gospel has the power to save, right? And a lot of Reformed pastors, they get so intent on
protecting the gospel,
protecting the gospel that they forget to preach it, right? They forget to preach it. They think they're in a seminary class trying to protect the gospel, when the gospel is our protection, right? Preach it and look out, because you're about to start. I mean, they say they want to flip tables.
Well, Jason, that's what's got me, and that's what's got me thinking is like, Doug shouldn't be the only pastor in trouble for proclaiming such a strong gospel like this.
Right.
If with the kind of sinners that I know exist on planet Earth, you mean to tell me that he gets the most flack for this particular situation in this case over against others?
Right.
There should be way more scandal going on to the world. There should be a whole news story set up, news stories built just to talk about Christians believing the gospel in this kind of way.
Well, and we don't even like to tell stories of whacked out sinners getting saved anymore, because I think we're afraid whacked out sinners will start showing up in our churches.
Well, you know what? Well, it's not just that. I think you're right, but I think we don't want people to know that we're whacked out sinners. So, you know,
Yeah.
you did something a couple shows ago when we were talking, and I cringed. I cringed for you when you talked about that you got your high school girlfriend pregnant. I cringed because I was like, oh man, he's gonna. And the reason I cringed is because in that moment, I'm thinking about, oh, you know, a person's character, protected, all this stuff. And I'm not thinking about, look what Jesus just did. Right?
When
Right?
but exactly, and I think that ability
Oh,
to resituate our story into the story of the gospel is, we just don't do it anymore, right? We we talk about like, man, I used to be really bad, but God saved me and now I'm not anymore, right? And we don't want to give details though, because the shame is still holding on. The shame is still hanging around. I mean,
oh.
here's what it took for me to learn to deal with the shame,
Yeah.
right? It is for it to be all exposed publicly, which is the right. And then you're like, okay, either Jesus takes the shame or not, right? I'm screwed, right? I got the big letter A on me now. And if and it feels like the rest of my life, right? Um, I I spent a number of years as one of the pastors at a pregnancy resource center, and I did uh, the funerals, right, when women would finally come to the conviction that their baby was dead because of their abortion. I would do funerals for these moms and sometimes their families, and every time you're like, yeah, this is. I mean, I hope that you've got this. You're doing funeral for a dead baby, and I've got one of those because of my sin, right? Like
Oh,
and so here you are. Do I believe the gospel or not? Right? God pushes it right up in front of your nose. Do you believe the gospel or not?
I'm
Right?
having a funeral for the baby that I killed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's here you are. It's like, my sin has, there is a child that is dead because of my sin as well, right? And now here I'm doing funerals for, right, God. And either that's because God loves you and he wants you to know all the way deep down into the bottom of the soles of your shoes that he loves you and you are forgiven, or God is mean and he's pushing your sin in your face so that you never live it down, right? And that, like John Owen says, it's a sin to think God doesn't love you, right? Because he's told you he does. He sent his son to prove it. He sends his spirit to raise Jesus from the dead to confirm the proof. Over and over and over, he has said, I love you. I've taken away your sins. As far as the east is from the west, you're clean. There's no shame, no fear. Come on over here. You're my son. You're my daughter. You're part of the family.
Mm.
Um, and there's no distance between you and me. There's it's all gone. That's it.
And
Go ahead.
come and eat with me.
Right, exactly. And then every week, come and eat with me again, and
Oh.
let me reconfirm it. Let me reconfirm it. Reconfirm that your sin is gone. Renew your my covenant love to you. Show you again, right? Over and over and over. God does this, and we look askance at someone and think, yeah, but not for them. Right. And
Which
I've had folks come to me that have, that, when uh you know young lady gets pregnant in the church, and I've had people confront me and say, I think you're too kind because of your own past. Like, you have no idea about Jesus. Like, you'd have no idea about Jesus.
hey, you don't
Right.
say.
Right. And it's like, that literally is why every time I see this young girl, I make sure to run over, give her a hug, take her around with me everywhere. I introduce her to people, say, "Hey, I love this young lady. She's a part of our church. Let me introduce you. She's
That's the
fantastic, right?" And
scandal. That's the
she's
scandal.
she's 9 months, 8 months pregnant, obviously out of wedlock because she's so young, and you're walking around showing her off because you love her, and you're like, because that's what Jesus does, right? Jesus draws us in, and you're like, oh Lord, you have no idea how messed up I am, and he's like, my son in whom I am well pleased, right? He's cavelling all over us in the pleasure that he has in us as his children, right? That's the kind of thing that he says to us and about us, and we mope.
I think this really, I think I wasn't planning on talking about this. You really got me curious though. There's two questions I want to ask. I probably shouldn't ask. One of them is I want to know, well, then what is baptism? I'm still there. Well, you said, hey, that's something for us for another time. I'm like, no, or maybe it's not. What is it? But the other thing is, I think more towards the direction of the conversation we wanted to have today, which I kind of don't know what we're going to have, because I was going to ask you, what is it that Knox needs to know today? But I think it's somewhat in the line of what we've been talking about, especially last week. You don't know God then, right? If you can look at situations and you're like, yeah, that person's done, or not them, Lord, or you don't understand the scandal of the gospel, you don't know God, because one of the ways that he has introduced himself to us is as a father.
Right.
And so,
yeah, Paul tells us that the reason that that we exist in families is because God is a father, right? The reason that we are fathers is because God is a father.
And I think maybe, probably the thing we need to re-establish is there's two things. I think we need to understand God as father, and then we need to redefine fatherhood.
Yeah.
Right? Because when we say father, that word for us has different kind of connotations to it, or we have different experiences that are more tangible experiences that we're not observing. And those tangible experiences don't let us observe the ultimate type of fatherhood, or we don't meditate on that. The fact that we have breath, the fact that we're taken care of, the fact that we exist in a planet with food and taste buds. And so sometimes the fatherhood of God, there's so many abundant blessings of them that we take them for granted. And the only thing that we see is a representative of that and say, well, that's fatherhood. And it's like, no, you don't understand. You're living through a form of fatherhood that gives you existence that you're taking for granted. And that's fatherhood. Right.
Right. And I mean, there are all sorts of, metaphysical, sociological, psychological realities that that sin twists up for us, right? And then and that we will be, that our life is spent untwisting, and then in the resurrection we see God face to face, or when after death, in heaven before the resurrection, we see God face to face, and we realize that we never got anywhere near untwisting, right? as much as we thought we did. But even just the beginning of the untwisting of fatherhood, so many of us had pictures of the gospel. The good,
we have fathers. Say it again. We have fathers that do what?
That are not of the good news, right? They didn't do a great job embodying the good news,
the reality of that. Yeah.
Reality of God's fatherhood. That were wrapped up in their own shame. That, their mummies, they're fully cut out of their grave wrappings. That they lived their lives in shame. They couldn't. They weren't able to resituate their own life story as a subplot within the gospel, within the good news of Jesus's kingship, within the good news of Jesus's lordship, and within the good news of the fatherhood of God and our adoption into the family. Right? And so they couldn't turn around and be great fathers because they were so busy, they were so weighed down by their guilt and their shame and their fear. And but what we need to do is then become fathers that say, oh, so what I need to do is learn to lay down my guilt, my shame, my fear at the foot of the cross, get my eyes fixed on God who is revealed perfectly in Jesus, and get busy imitating, right? What has Jesus done for me? How can I do that for my family? What has the Father done for me? How can I do that for my family? How can I display that in a limited sort of way? My son he goes through, he gets excited about something, and he's learned some origami, and he's gotten really good at origami. And he was making a crane, right? He made a bunch of cranes, and he said, he was sitting here, he was holding this little crane, and he said, Dad, if there weren't real cranes in the world, this little image of a crane would be nothing but a series of random folds. He said, just like me and the image of God. It's like, dang, like you just out theologianed so many, right? He's just looking at this little image of a crane, saying,
Breaking up a lot.
where does this get its meaning? Oh, am I breaking
Yeah,
up?
you broke up a little. Right after dang.
What he said. Okay, right after dang.
Yeah.
Right, where does this image of a crane get its meaning?
Yeah.
Well, because it reflects a real crane, right? As a father, where do I get my meaning, right? In so much as I reflect the Father in heaven, right? That's where I'm told I'm the image of the Father in heaven. So how do I press into that, conform to that? And it has to do with laying down our guilt and our fear and our shame, and trusting that it's forgiven, it's taken away, it doesn't define us anymore. Right? If we're wearing that backpack, we're going to be bent over and not able to stand up straight and be the kind of father that reflects the Father in heaven. Right? He lives a joyful, shame-free existence. And that's where it begins. Like Jesus died on the cross to take it all away, to take the sin, shame, fear, guilt, all of it.
When we were talking last time about identity, one of the things that I think towards the end of our conversation, we really started saying, it's kind of impossible to have this conversation without a Trinitarian perspective and worldview of the Godhead. Like you got to have the Godhead at the center point of this, because this is a line. I got to find it in here inside of a Delighting in the Trinity that you're making me read, along with like 300 other books you have me reading. And I highlighted it because I thought it was so good, because I thought it was, I want to change what he says too, but he says, this is Michael Reeves. He says, the Trinity is the cockpit of all Christian thinking. And I thought, okay, that's not how we are currently acting. That's not our presupposition, even in evangelism. But I want to change even what he says a little bit, because I said the Trinity is the cockpit of all right thinking. Right. Like I want to change it and move it outside of just the Christianity, of course, is the center of it. But I want to say you can't think rightly about anything in the world apart from understanding the Godhead and the Trinity. You just don't. You can't put man, women, and child together with the objective ontological reality with different economic realities. How does that marry?
Yeah.
Right? You can't. Employer, how do you get through Ephesians apart from the Godhead? It talks about husband, wives, children, master, slave.
Right. He says, here's the relationship, the great mystery, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit revealed to you in Christ. Right. Yeah, and then he goes on to apply it. Right. Family, employer, relationships broken down by
That's right.
sin, right? How does it affect that? You've got Galatians, similar sort of series of arguments, and he gets to he's moving towards the fruitfulness, right? The whole time, how he's talking about how do you restore fruitfulness. He begins by talking about the triune life revealed to us in Christ, and then us being brought into it by the work of the Spirit, right? The Jesus died on the cross to take away the barriers between us and eternal fellowship with God, which is what we're created for, right? We're made in his image, so that, which means we are the kind of creature that can have fellowship with God, right? That's the fundamental nature of being made in the image of God. We're the kind of creature that can have fellowship with God. Sin broke that out, broke us out of that fellowship before we had even fully entered into it, right? And then the history is the story of God taking all of the obstacles out of the way between us and fellowship with him, restoring us to fellowship with him, right? So Jesus, when it says Jesus brings a sword to chop up the family, it's because the family was getting in the way of fellowship with the triune family, right? He needed to break it
How?
down because
How?
the family has by the time, so when Jesus is on the scene during his ministry, they said, oh, he said, I didn't come to bring peace, but to bring a sword. Right? He's in the middle of talking about the we have Abraham as our father,
Right.
right? So
Oh.
and he says, oh, the family, the family needs to get up here on this altar, right? Needs to be chopped up. It needs to be sacrificed, because right now you've turned it into an idol and it's between you and God, right? And God is intent on fellowship. So anything that we take and make an idol and we put it between us and him, God's like, I know what to do with that, right? And he cuts it up. We destroy
Mm.
things by making them into idols, because we're putting an image between us and God, and God says, no, you're going to have direct fellowship with me. You're my
So
people.
he's going through and he's like, if you would believe, if we had known Abraham, you would know who I am, right? So
Right,
he's like, because Abraham,
right, yeah, because Abraham had fellowship
so
with
he's
me.
taking their
Abraham
God,
had faith in
he's
me.
taking their God and saying, ew. Like,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
But by the time you get to Paul, right after the resurrection, Paul is like, okay, now that the family has been destroyed, let's rebuild it, right? Let's put it back together in the way it's
Mm.
intended to be, right? Once we come into fellowship with God, things are given back. Things that were destroyed as idols are given back to us as gifts, right? In their proper
I
sphere.
want to say too that as I'm thinking about this, that really if you I keep saying this, I keep saying it. I don't know if I need to say it in other ways that people can get it, but you really have to spend so much time in Genesis, in the creation, because what you just said is following a creation flow where God makes something and then he breaks it. He cuts it, right? He splits it. Right? And then he fills it and he makes it better than it was before. And so you have this thing going on where like, oh, we have Abraham. This is all good. It's like, and he cuts it. Right. And then you
Right.
have coming up here with
Yeah.
Paul. He's like, now let me put it back together. Right. And then he feels, let me make it how it actually should be. Let me make it better than even was before. You love Abraham, you're going to love this,
Yeah.
right? Because now it's all
Right.
the orders are applied properly in relationship. What do you call it last time? Under the super identity, right? Right.
Right.
Abraham ain't your
Right.
identity.
They're rearranged. Well, that's the thing
Part
is,
of it.
and this is parents, and some of these things you'd go through whether they're sin or not, right? Parents raise
Right.
kids. It's wonderful having kids, raising them up, but then they get up and they go away, right? We had my oldest back from college over the weekend, and just delightful, wonderful time, and big long dinner. Everybody's laughing and having fun. I'm like, man, I miss this because my oldest has gone away, but which is what she's supposed to do, right? There's a separation, there's a cutting between us and her as she becomes an adult, and with the goal that she then gets married and starts her own family, and then you end up with a whole new glory or grandkids. But if you can't let go of the glory that you've got, and let it die, you don't get the new glory that that is the greater glory, right? There's a resurrection glory that God built into the way the historical world develops. That if you hold on to the glory you've got in the moment, you don't, it doesn't die, you lose, you don't ever get to the resurrection glory, and then the glory that you have ends up being destroyed anyways, because it's not like it's not going to die. Well, you've got the 30-year-old son that you keep home and keep him in the basement so that he never leaves. You end up with a shame on your parenting, rather than the glory that you have to have, that you can only get to through the death of separation.
I don't like.
And that's just the way. Yeah, it's the way God built the world. It's just it's a series of deaths and resurrections.
Yeah, I figured that out when you asked for wisdom. Yeah, that's what happened. So you sent me this long, not tweet stream, but a long message, and here's what's crazy. I got your message, and I got it. I don't remember when I got it. When I actually looked at it, what time did you send this? It was 10:35 a.m. I got this message. So I'm in the flow of things. I can't remember even where I was, and I don't even know what you was talking about. I got some reciprocity, reciprocal violence, and or sin, false fellowship, or share scapegoating. I don't. What was this about, and what does it have to do with what we're talking about right now and today? Because this was
Right.
all like.
So you were like, hey, let's talk about the Trinity. Because you're reading delighting in the Trinity, and I was like, okay, yeah, let's talk about the Trinity. And so I started thinking, like, what what difference does it make to our day-to-day lives that God is triune, right? What is where is it that you see the big differences? Because there's a lot of philosophical things that are solved, and the problem of the one and the many, and
Right.
That there's things at the legal and political level that work themselves
Right.
out. But like in my day-to-day life, why does it make a difference that God is triune? And so was just thinking about how, well, it actually does affect directly our relationships day in and day out all of the time, because we are all living in relationships with other sinners, right? We're sinners living in relationships with sinners, and relationships are reciprocal, right? Relationships are a series of reciprocal interactions. That's what makes up a relationship. I say something, you say something back, and then I respond, and then you respond to what I said, right? It's a conversation. And you meet sometimes people that they can't do reciprocal, right? They don't know how. And so you say something, and then they talk about whatever they want to talk about, and then you respond, and they keep talking about, right? They don't respond to you. And when it gets really, really bad, you're dealing with a narcissist where everything, they don't actually believe there is a world outside of themselves, right? But the more that we serve the Lord, the more we come to understand, we think about ourselves less and others more, and there's this growing ability to live reciprocally, right, in response to one another. And that's what a relationship is. The problem is, if relationships are reciprocal, what do you do with sin, right? Throughout history, you've got you've got the Hatfields and the McCoys as proof that there's no way out when you live in simple reciprocity when sin gets
Cain
in,
and Abel.
right? Cain and Abel, right? I step on your toe, you kick me in the shin, I hit you in the face with a brick, you kill me, my brother kills you, your cousins kill my brother, and then we have a war, right? That's a reciprocal relationship once sin gets involved. But
Can I add to
that's
that
not
too?
a
Which I just want to
yeah.
add to that, to what we're seeing now. If you haven't thought of it, is like the way this is going culturally is you've enslaved me. Now I'm going to enslave you. right? That's where we're going. And all we're going, the way we're going
Right.
right now is like white people, unless they bow or be at certain place, they're going to be the new slave. And anybody who is on
Right.
this other side of this new religion and doctrine, they are going to be the new slaves. We're going to be the new masters. Like that's where we're going. That's where we're headed.
Right. And there's people now that are willing to say it out loud, right?
Right.
They're willing to say like, "Well, look, they enslaved us. It's our turn to enslave
Yep.
them."
Yep.
Right? They treated us in an unhuman way. It's our turn to treat them in an unhuman way. That's how
Yeah.
it works, right? And the reality is that is how it
Hmm.
works, right? That's the problem. That the problem is that is how it works. That's why the lives of nations throughout history are filled with war. That's why the tribes eventually eat one another, right? If when you've got enough tribal distance and time, eventually the tribes dehumanize each other so much that they end up trying to devour one another. Um, and but Paul says, if you bite and devour one another, be careful lest you be consumed by one another. Right? He
Mm.
says that is a real temptation to once you get into these cycles of reciprocity, um, to dehumanize the other so much that you no longer that you just are using one another, devouring one another. So, um, and so as I've thought about it, there's really three options once you get into sin gets into your the reciprocity of your relationship, right? You can return evil for evil.
Hmm.
Somebody sinned against you, you sin back usually
Yeah.
harder to get back at them, and right um and it becomes the relationship becomes violent, either emotionally, spiritually, physically violent, right there. So you move towards violence. The other is you just move away from one another, right? You stop being you stop the relationship because it's going to move towards violence. And what's interesting is, you see this sometimes in marriages. uh you see a marriage where they just fight more and more and more and more, right? But you also see marriages where they they just become less and less connected, less and less in
Mm.
fellowship, less and less reciprocal, um, because and they sort of back off, and you've got the man cave and the uh the the um woman's area, right?
You can say
The
kitchen. You
wherever
can say
the
kitchen.
yeah. Right, you've got they just separate, and the fellowship just goes away. And there's no longer the deep abiding fellowship that you always hoped for,
Right.
right? And in those situations you get kind of a um you get you people sort of go invisible, right? And because they're built for fellowship, they're built to see one another in each other's eyes, right? They don't get to see each other directly. They can only see themselves in each other's eyes. As they move apart from one another, they they sort of become invisible. They can't see themselves anymore. They uh and sometimes you get like I call it grandma got a new tattoo syndrome, where they start doing things to prove they still exist, right? And
I've seen
I think a
this.
lot of plastic surgery, yeah, you see it. So you've got plastic surgery as people get older. Sometimes, or often, I think, when they're older, this is what's going on: is they're just trying to prove they still exist, get somebody to look at them so they can see themselves, like that, see that they're
Well,
real
and
again, right? Because they're kind of becoming ghosts in their own
well, I've seen
lives.
this too, and these are more subtle things that people don't like to talk about. You start hitting this stuff, people get acting crazy, but I've seen it come out in a lot of ways very simply in Christendom because we know we can't do the whole. We're careful about too much tattoos. There is a group, but they care
Yep.
about too much tattoos. But what we'll do is we'll do like it will be um something that's almost borderline rebellious. Like I'm gonna get almost a complete buzz cut, right? Or I'm
Right.
gonna dye my hair grain, or or
Right.
I've seen it too with with guys. They'll do it in other ways where it's like, you're not wearing that for your wife to look at you.
Right. Yeah. Guys that get really into um the way they look, or that, I mean, they sometimes they just take on a hobby,
That's right.
right? And then they want to, and it's a way of proving that I still exist when my wife no longer sees me anymore, because when we move too close together, we fight, right? Because there's sin, the relationship is broken, and the sin is there, and if we move towards one another, we fight. We don't want to get divorced because we know that's wrong, and so you end up living separate
Together.
lives. But then together, yeah, separate lives under the same roof. So that's one option. But then the third option is that you find somebody to hate together, fellowship, right? I've seen only work during political seasons, right? When you've got, because they both really hate the new Democratic nominee, right? Like, the one thing they agree on is that Hillary Clinton is the devil incarnate, and so their marriage functions so long as Hillary's running, right? And you, in the town that I lived, was a lot of bumper stickers. When I first moved there, I hate George Bush and I vote. It was like a really popular bumper sticker, and you're like, man, when we get, and at the time I thought, man, when we end up with a Democrat, violence is going to break out, because what's holding them together is a common hatred.
Mm.
So um, we had multiple people went down with crowbars and broke windows of businesses, right? No reason, no, nothing. It's just the no longer had a scapegoat, just broke out.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
you had regular occurrences of violence until Trump was elected, and then the violence all stopped again because they all went back to I hate Trump and I vote, right? So they had a
Right.
common scapegoat that kept the illusion of fellowship going, right? And so you see marriages that are like this, right? They get into hating something together, or the wife gets into really hating something, and so the husband jumps on board because it's something that they can not fight about, right? um she's, at least she's not mad at me, well, and I'll just help her get mad at that thing, right? So the but all of those are false fellowships. None of those are real. It's all fake fellowship. And I mean, you see marriages where they the only time they feel close to one another is when they fight, and so they fight more. And you think that's not real fellowship, though. It's like,
Mm.
I guess it's better than divorce, but it's not real fellowship, right? So, but this is where the triune God steps in and makes such a difference, right? Relationships are reciprocal relationships. He doesn't say, I'm just quit being reciprocal altogether. Instead, he injects himself into the story, right? He sends his son, and his son uh, jumps into that role of scapegoat for the whole world and becomes the scapegoat. But normally, what happens is the scapegoat is somebody that hates you back, and that therefore, because the scapegoat hates me back, we can gather around that hatred and have a right. But this scapegoat jump out mechanism, this wood chipper of a relational wood chipper that we have created in order to have a false fellowship, and he jumped to the machine, and he is beaten. He takes all of spit on. He's insulted. Right. And he's then crucified, and he dies. Um, and so, and then he says, "Now look at me as the scapegoat. Right? Look my direction. I'm the scapegoat." And then from that position where, because the Spirit comes and revives him, he then, as that scapegoat, turns around and loves from that position, right? So whereas before you added the third person into the relationship as the scapegoat in order to fuel the hatred that creates the ability to continue having a reciprocal relationship,
A false unity.
Jesus, a false
Yeah.
unity, right? Jesus then loves, right? And then he brings us up into that true relationship that is an eternal relationship of loving kindness, an eternal relationship of joyful reciprocated love, and says, now you as my people are a part of this relationship, this reciprocal relationship. And then he goes so far as to say, and when you sin against one another, instead of responding in kind, returning evil for evil, he says, look at the way I have loved you and respond to my love by loving the person who's in front of you, who's made in my image. So return my love through the image of your neighbor, right? So in a marriage, how this ends up working is Jesus becomes the scapegoat, but instead of a false unity, his love is then poured into this relationship, or that this reciprocal relationship that's broken because of sin. And he says, don't look at one another and respond in kind. Look at me and respond to my love. I've loved you first. Now you love me back. Respond to my love by loving the person in front of you, by forgiving their sins, by being kind to them, even when they sin against you. Right. So he restores the relationship, but not from a distance. He restores the relationship by joining it, right? By joining it and adding, when if you've seen Jesus, you've seen the Father, right? Jesus is the complete, full, perfect revelation of God. So if we want to know what God is like, how he acts, we look at Jesus, right? Jesus is where we look. And Jesus dies for our sins, forgives us of our sins, and then stays with us, right? I now go out into all the world, baptizing the nations, teaching them all that I have done, all that I've taught you, and I will be with you even to the end of the age, right? So he forgives our sins. He takes them away as far as the east is from the west. He promises to never treat us according to our sins again, and then he stays with us the whole time, right? That's what God is like. And then he says, now imitate me, right? Go forth and imitate me. You be like that, and I'll be with you the whole time, because you can't do it in your own strength. But keep looking at me in every relationship. Look at the way I've treated you, and then treat the person in front of you in response to my love, right? So he pulls us out of this 1v1 reciprocal relationship, and he even pulls us out of the 1+1+ scapegoat relationship of a false unity of hatred, by inserting himself into all of it. And he can do that because he is eternally in a reciprocal relationship. He's not doing anything new. He's eternally been in a reciprocal relationship of loving kindness, of joyful fellowship, of self-giving love. Right? That's the way he always has been. And then we are just taken by the Spirit up into that relationship with him. So that's what all of that meant. I was still trying to work it out when I was texting you. So
Is this how
I was having these realizations this week or last week.
Is this when we talked last time, you were saying, hey, I think I figured out the answer to our kind of how we deal with identity? Is this what you were talking about?
Yeah, this is a major part of it, is that because Jesus, as he inserts himself, Jesus doesn't take us up out of and give us a whole new kind of thing, right? A whole new kind of way of having a relationship that's no longer this reciprocal relationship. Or he inserts himself into the things that he's told us to do that we messed up. And his presence restores those things back to us, right? We end that. So this week I was listening to John Denver's greatest hits, and then clicked straight over from that to Tupac's greatest hits. Because
why not?
The Arl Whiplash, right? Now it's getting to be the afternoon, and I was like, oh man, I need some Dre beats, because it's like pouring coffee in your ears, and California Love comes on. So the last song on the John Denver album was Wild Montana Skies, one of my favorites. About a boy that grew up in Montana and then tried to move away, but ended up coming back because Montana had given him a home and given him, and so Montana was just the defining thing, right? And then California Love comes on, and Tupac says the exact same thing about Compton, exact same thing that John Denver is saying about Montana. And I was like, this is the exact, they're both talking about how the place that they grew up gave them an identity, right? Told them who they were and formed them, right? They were formed by the community that they grew up in, and they're both celebrating it. And I think both of them are doing exactly what we're supposed to do. Man, I love the place I grew up. It formed me in these ways and these ways. And I'm so grateful for that. Now, it also brought with it certain temptations and things. But that's why Jesus died on the cross, right? Is to cleanse. His blood has a cleansing effect on our history, on the systems that God used to form us. Christ has a cleansing effect so that we can turn around and say, right, we can make the distinctions. What are the good things? What are the bad things? What are the blessings? Like the Lauryn Hill song that we have talked about before, right? Every ghetto, every city.
Every place I've been.
Every place I've been. She tells the story of all of the blessings that she got as she moved around, and it's a beautiful thing. And as Christians, because we sin in different places, right, we end up pretending our story is different than it is to our kids. And so our kids don't know how to say thank you for their own.
So the thing that
when I was growing up, I was so much worse.
Yeah. When it comes to, when talking with identity, we're, I've heard a lot of people talk. I was just talking to Jason Whitlock, and I feel like, and I want to keep in mind everything you just got done saying about how Christ enters into the reciprocal relationship and ultimately doesn't stop the reciprocation, but then puts the right things in there to reciprocate and say, reciprocate like the Father and I have been reciprocating throughout eternity.
For all eternity. Yeah, exactly.
For all eternity. And then says, and here's the Spirit so that you can do that, right? And so reciprocate this back and forth to each other, right? Just like me and the Father are doing. So, and so here's part of what's interesting to me is I'm watching the Christians who should be the ones proclaiming this message and modeling it out on the political stage in front of everybody, because right now the culture is trying to figure out how to do that one way or the other, and what they do is create more tribalism. So in order to reciprocate, you have to be in my tribe. Like, in order to reciprocate, you have to identify exactly like me, right? In order to reciprocate, even though your identity might not be like mine, this is another option, is that we have to hate the same things, right? So then that's how we now have this reciprocation, because we hate the same things. But when it comes to Christians, the identifying marker for us is baptism. And then there's two, I guess I want to make clear of. One of them is humanity. You're human.
Right.
And the other one is baptism. There's a different kind of, there's an in and then there's another in, right? Like there's a restoration for there's your original state that's fallen, and here's your state now in reciprocation, in lock with the system, how it's supposed to go. When I've seen Christians, I would have never thought that the social justice movement or the racial animosity or the same cultural push would have it as much or even more effect between Christians.
Right.
And so what is it, where's the breakdown happening that those, because it's not like people, and I want to be very true about this, it's not like people who are disagreeing on this topic have a theological difference on the flow and function of the Trinity. If you see them on paper, they look the exact same. But somewhere in the reciprocation, there's a disconnect between how the relationship then flows and functions when you have animosities between brothers. Yeah. And so I don't even want to talk about what happens outside of baptism, because in one sense, like Paul's like, not my show, not my monkeys, in one way, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
We'll get there in a second. But if my household can't come together, like, and model this, what's the point in trying to figure out what's going on out there?
Right. Because there's those moments, where you're standing in front of the firing squad, and that the relationship between you and the guy pointing a gun at you also involves Jesus. And he doesn't, right? And so you can look at him and you say, Father, forgive him. He doesn't know what he's doing, right? And those, for some reason, those seem to be easier for us right now than looking at somebody who is in the same denomination as us, oftentimes, right?
At two, Brute?
Yeah. At two? And you look at each other and you're like, there's just no way we could possibly ever get along, right? Like and you both know that Jesus is a part of your relationship with one another, right? And somehow you can't. But I think it's because the markers of a tribe have to do with cultural, the way you express yourself, the way you physically identify yourself. Tribal markers in the ancient world generally had to do with tattoos and clothing, right? Tattoos, clothing, and then speech to a certain extent. But you'd have 3-4 tribes that all spoke the exact same language, but they knew which tribe you were in based on your tattoos and your dress and things like that. And what I think what we have done is that we have embraced those Christian tribal identities as over against everything else, right? And so we're always trying to protect which tribe within the church we're in, because that is, we've sort of taken that on as an identity marker rather than as what it is, which is a cultural marker. There shouldn't be any problem. Let's say I go to a church where everybody wears suits on a Sunday morning, and this other person goes to a church where everyone wears polos, and I show up in my suit. There should never be a problem. Like, everybody should.
No, Jason, no, I don't think that's fair. Hold on a second. I'm gonna push back on this, because I think, and feel free to throw the book at me.
Okay.
Here's what I'm hearing in my head, being around evangelicalism as long as I have, and different frames of it. What I'm hearing is that our tribal markers are more pure than the others. And so if you want to get to the authentic, there is a tribe that has the closest position to the authentic. So if a baby has not made a profession of faith and you are baptizing them, or you guys at your church don't speak in tongues and we do, we got the Spirit, y'all don't, you are further away from the authentic. If you are not waiting for professions, you are further away from the authentic. If you don't baptize your kids, you are further away from the authentic. And so these tribes are not just existing because of some arbitrary realities. In Christendom, our tribes exist because we are searching for the purest form of authenticity inside of Christendom to be as close to the Godhead or obedient to the Godhead as possible. So I don't think that those are arbitrary amongst us in evangelicalism.
I don't think we think they're arbitrary. I agree. I think a lot of them are more arbitrary than we like to admit. But
well, some of them we do say are arbitrary. Like we're saying, hey, some of those, like for instance, Baptists, it shouldn't separate us. But boy,
but it does. Yeah, it absolutely
absolutely
does.
throws a
right.
yeah.
And this is so I've seen a lot of Baptists, kids that grew up Baptists, pop through Presbyterianism on their way to Roman Catholicism.
Okay.
Right. And so it's become one of those things that if I see it starting to happen, I'm pretty straightforward now. Like, hey, are you on your way to becoming a Roman Catholic?
Well, they wouldn't even know. They wouldn't
Often
know that they are.
They don't. But it's exactly what you're talking about, though, that usually leads people to Roman Catholicism. They grew up a Baptist, and they think the reason that I am good, right? The reason that I am justified is because I am a part of the right corporate group. I'm a part of the right tribal group, part of the right people. I'm a Baptist, right? I'm a
I don't think they would say it
conservative
like
Baptist.
that. I don't think.
Right. No, they wouldn't say it like that. They
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah,
say
yeah.
it like that, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that's not how Baptists talk. Now, because I've seen it with Presbyterians too, right? The reason I'm good is because I'm in the OPC, I'm in the PCA, I'm in the best of the corporate. My corporate identity is wrapped up in which group I'm a part of, and my corporate identity is justified, right? I get my personal justification from my corporate identity, right? Now, then they learn something new. They learn about Presbyterianism, and they say, "Oh man, I didn't know about this. I didn't know about that. I need to join that group because my justification, my personal justification is in danger because I'm in the wrong group." And so they jump over to a new group and they say, "Now I have got it," right? Or Presbyterian that grows up and they're like, "I should be a Baptist." They are much more intentional. They're more intense about their faith, right? They're the recon Marines of the Christendom. And yet and so they jump from one group to the next thinking that they have improved their relationship with Jesus. And they say, and Roman Catholics are the worst, right? They're the farthest away. And then they meet G.K. Chesterton and they say, but he knows Jesus, and he knows Jesus in a way that's really enlightening to me. And I thought I was a part of the right group, but he's a part of a different group. I wonder if I should join that group because that group maybe is going to get me closer to Jesus, right? And they think switching tribes, switching people groups within the corporate groups within Christendom is moving them closer to Jesus. When the reality is, right? Why is G.K. Chesterton wise? I think he is. Well, it's because he knows Jesus, right? He knows the King of all wisdom, the source of all wisdom, and has a growing relationship with him. And so that's the thing that we should take away. Not, oh my gosh, should I become Roman Catholic? Oh my gosh, he's introducing a new aspect of Jesus to me that I didn't know. Wonderful. I can be more like Jesus now from where I'm at, right? I don't need to switch groups to become more like Jesus because our individual justification is by faith, not by group membership, right? Now, Baptists say that out loud, but I've then seen their children act like it's because they're Baptist, right? But the evidence of it is that you feel like you need to switch groups to keep growing in the faith, right? You need to switch groups. Now your theology might change and you think, okay, for the peace and purity of the church as a whole, it's better for me to go to this church rather than that church, right? When we first moved to Spokane, my uncle's a Reformed charismatic pastor, and
I'm sorry, did you
Baptist,
say
and
Reformed
yeah,
charismatic?
Reformed charismatic, yeah. And so
I
me and
like
my
him.
family started going to the church. He's wonderful. He's a wonderful pastor, and we started going to church there, and after a few weeks, my kids were like, "This is weird. This is not how we've always done church." And after a few weeks, actually a few months, my uncle sat me down and he said, we love having you guys here. It's really great, but I know you're a Presbyterian, and we financially support this Presbyterian church plant, and we think you should go check it out, right? We think you're going to be more comfortable there, and you'd be a big blessing to them. And they're a Baptist charismatic church who is helping a Presbyterian church plant pay the bills in order to get off the ground. And so we went over there, and my kids immediately said, "Oh, this liturgy feels like home," because it's the same liturgy they'd grown up with. It was smaller. They liked that, and then they connected well with the pastor. They None of the kids left during the sermon.
Right.
So they weren't the only ones that were just like, wait, as my daughter said, "How old do you have to be before you get to start going to real church here, Dad?" And that wasn't about the charismatic church. That was one of the other churches we visited. It was a great church, but my daughter immediately was like, "Why are all the kids leaving? Don't they think that they should be in church, real church?" So it's different cultural expectations, but the so there might be a time that it's good to move churches for the peace and purity of the church within a city, but
So are
that's why
you
you should be making those decisions.
so are you saying then that we've held up, I don't want to say personal preferences, but maybe true convictions higher on the relationship status board than we probably should have? So is that what you're saying?
That's what I've seen a lot of folks do.
Because I think there is, when I became, so coming from a very charismatic background, my convictions about the biblical teaching couldn't let me stay there. I was
Right,
underneath a woman pastor. There were no real elder men. So the foundation of what a church was absolutely bankrupt. So I
right,
couldn't be there, right? Regardless of whatever, I know God saved me there. There's good doctrine. There was some good doctrine that was being taught there, but the foundations of what a church and structure was absolutely obliterated. So I had to go find, you know, when I matured beyond where I was, I had to go find a place. But in that process of maturing, um, something kind of felt like I clicked inside of evangelicalism, where it was like, where's the purest form of Christianity at?
right.
And that became a chase for me to find out, well, where is the purest form of Christianity at? Are you saying that's not something that we should be chasing? Or what do you, because I feel like there's a point of where it's like, I'm trying to find that because I believe that if I found the purest form of Christianity, then I would be a better Christian. Like, that's
Right,
what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the clearest, like, it's like finding the, if you go and you're trying to make, oh, this is going to be horrible. If you're trying to make drugs, okay, you
right.
don't want it cut 6 or 7 times if you want to sell it. Not like I know, just for the record.
Right,
But
yeah, but
you
right,
want the
but
purest substance
you
you can get to make the best stuff.
but it depends on what you mean by purist, right? Because how are we justified?
Right. Okay. So you're saying take the things that are essentials, the gospel, justification,
No, I mean,
say
I'm saying what is the thing that marks a church as pure?
how they live before the Lord. Right. So, in the sense that what I mean by that
That
is
that's not
they're,
what marks us, though,
no,
right?
I agree. Yeah. So justification in
Yeah,
Christ, like, that's the mark, like being
right.
justified.
But what are we justified? But how do we grip onto that justification?
Yeah. Right.
By
Right.
by
In
faith,
faith. Yeah.
right?
Faith.
Faith is the mark
So
of
then
God's people, right?
So then what we're doing is taking and doing other stuff besides the mark to bring into forms of purity of
Yeah. So we start saying, well, what's how I want to be right before the Lord. right? I want to be, I
Want to
so
be
I need,
holy.
I want to be holy. And so what do I need? Well, I need the purest form of Christianity that I can find. And like, well, no, you need faith, right? Jesus' death on the cross plus nothing. It sounds
Amen.
so, it sounds like, it sounds
Well, because
too simple, too scandalously good to be true, right?
well, because now what you're saying though is now this opens up. This is
Like,
this is
so,
really good because here's
yeah,
the deal. Because now you have to open the door wider than I think we want to open the
right,
door for
100%.
what's pure now inside of Christendom. So if you are falling out in the spirit or speaking in tongues, you're as pure as me.
If you got faith, right? Because that's our faith derives from nothing but the cross of Jesus Christ, right? Our purity is based on nothing but the cross of Jesus Christ. Now, here's the thing that we don't believe. We don't believe that Jesus reforms and matures his people. So we start looking for the most reformed, the most pure, the place with the holiest group of people. And right now, I am not saying that there's not times that you got to switch churches, you got to move churches, and right,
No, no,
but
no, no,
you're
no, no.
not,
No, right.
right, none of that. So, but I'm saying that if we often do it for the wrong reason, right? We do it because we think we do it out of fear or out of guilt or out of shame. We base our decision based on what we don't want rather than what we do want, and
But
so
J- Jason, they didn't have an abortion ministry at the church,
right, yeah,
so I had to go.
yet, right, we will walk away from institutions. Christians will walk away from institutions like it's hopeless that God will ever get a hold of this institution or that institution. He got a hold of you. Talk about hopeless, right? You are so much more a hopeless case. This is where we started, right? You're worse. I am so much more a hopeless case than the PCUSA. Right now, I ended up having to walk away from the PCUSA.
Right.
Right, because there comes a point when you look around and you think, okay, the gospel is not being preached here anymore, and I'm having kids, and I need a place where the gospel's being preached, right? It's an extreme case, but I got saved there, right? I had a good experience, right? I was introduced to John Calvin there. I was taught the Westminster Confession there, right? It was a huge blessing. And when I looked around and realized that most everybody had left that believed those things, but there was one guy who stayed and taught the baptism class year after year after year, right? and now you look around my city and there are 12 Reformed churches, and all of them but two, the root goes back to this guy faithfully teaching a baptism class, right? The elders and the pastors of all these Reformed churches all over the city. This guy was the one who, over the course of 30 years, basically transformed the city from a PCUSA Sunday school and baptism class.
I can't see people liking anything that you're saying right now.
I know. It's because it's so scandalous, right? Jesus.
I can't. There's,
right?
this
like,
is. I want. This is. I want.
Like I moved away in 1999 from Spokane, right? I came back 10 years later. There were no Reformed churches when I left. Came back 10 years later to over 10. In one decade, there had, and every single one of them, you say, where are the roots? Is one guy's Sunday school in a church that is slowly apostatizing, right? That's the it's.
But are you saying, you're not saying for to stay in bad churches?
Depends. It depends on the situation, right? So I don't think so. because there are bad churches and then there are bad churches, right?
Well, okay, so let's take. Here I am, young man, preaching in the church. I'm I'm a musician in the church. I'm running revivals in the church. I'm not the pastor of the church. I was preaching
Right.
every Sunday evening. I was preaching, and I had opportunity to, at least I thought I did, but it really didn't. To help reform this church as I'm becoming reformed.
Yeah.
The church has a woman pastor, no elders. And every time God looked like he was blessing some of the work that we were doing, because it would grow, she would come in and say, "Oh, look at this nice little crowd of people. I'll take that." And then it would just, kind of fall apart.
Yep.
And again, was a Christian, but she's a woman pastor.
Right. What were there opportunities to talk about the fact that the Bible teaches that women shouldn't be pastors?
Privately, but not in any sort of public way, and it would have been treasonous to do so.
Yeah. So that was what dislodged me from the PCUSA, was confronting two things: women in the ministry, and confronting is actually such a hard word to even attach to it, because all I did was say, hey, so I was reading through the Bible and it says this here.
Right.
I'm just trying to figure out how to look at what we do and look at the Bible and
put these two together.
I don't see how they fit together. Can you help me? And the pastor pulled out the Book of Church Order and says, this is how we interpret the Bible here.
Oh, okay.
I was like, oh, we're Roman Catholics then, right?
Got it.
And he did not the pushback didn't go well.
Right. There was no way to reconcile that.
There was no way to reconcile it. The pushback didn't go well. And at the same time, I was already in an argument with him about Freemasonry Sunday. So it's like, I don't know, so Freemasonry Sunday happens and I'm like, this is weird. What's Freemasonry? And so I'm talking to my mom after church and she's like, I don't know, but I know your grandma always told me no good Lutheran girl is in the Freemasons, right? Or Job's Daughters was the Freemasonry for women. So she's like, I don't know what it is, but I know it's not Christian because your grandma and your grandpa were, they knew. And it's that generation that really was a part of it. And so my grandma and grandpa's faithfulness training up my mom about Freemasonry ended up basically causing me to say, oh, okay, I'm going to look into it. And I look into it. I'm like, oh, this is a weird cult.
Yeah, right.
And then go to the pastor and say, hey, Freemasonry Sunday, what's with that? I'm really concerned because I just started looking into Freemasons and it doesn't seem like a good thing to be attaching ourselves to. Yeah. And he said, well, some of our biggest tithers are Freemasons, so I don't rock the boat. And I was like, what I said to him was, that's a joke that we tell. That's not a real thing. That's not how we make decisions, right? And he just said, when you get older, you'll understand.
Figure it out. Yeah, I've heard that.
And so between those two things, confronting, I was a youth pastor at the time, lost my job as a youth pastor. So then you're like, okay, I believe that God can reform the PCUSA. And so to immediately run away without saying, hey, but the good news, right? Like Jesus, right? Without first saying that, would be to go against what I still to this day believe is true. I believe God will win back the mainline denominations. I believe the gospel is powerful enough to revive not just people, but whole institutions. Right. So at that point I left and I was like, and now I go into Exodus in the wilderness, but I was the youth pastor of First Presbyterian Church in Moscow, Idaho. So I go into the wilderness and meet Doug Wilson. He's in Moscow, and I thought that there was no one left and there's 1,000 people, Reformed Presbyterians meeting like half a block from my house, or like 6 blocks from my house. So it was really funny because I didn't know any of it existed, but I didn't know it was there.
So there's times in certain situations you need to just address the situation for what it is when you're in the moment, and you need to have some wisdom in doing so. So there's guidelines and principles for
there's
it.
guidelines, principles, but it's also from your jurisdiction, right? If you're an elder in a
Yes.
church and you come to particular conclusions, you have a jurisdiction and a duty from that position. If you're just a guy, just a girl, just you coming and sitting in the pews, you've got a particular jurisdiction, and that is your job to protect. And so, when you're having, if you've got kids, part of your duty is to make sure that they're hearing the preaching of the word. And so if you can legitimately say the word is not preached here anymore, right? We have a circus instead of a sermon. And
It's
it's
just
your jurisdiction involves your kids, and you got to get them to a place where they're going to hear the word preached. And
right. Okay. So, but there's certain distinctives that we want to take and raise higher than that we should,
right. Yeah.
to the point that we're like going for the purity of the thing again. We're looking for, because I found that just keeping it inside of the reform circles, our move has been based on this form of purity of doctrine.
Yeah.
And how we have our rating system on people.
Right.
Boom, 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 boom. Purity of,
Yeah.
and so
here's a good example. My the preacher last week at my church preaching on the man amongst the tombs, right? Great, which we just spent some time talking about. But he was talking about how it's a horror situation, right? You amongst the tombs, it's in the fog, you've got this man screaming so loud that it's scaring everybody. He's tearing apart the chains, and he's cutting himself, and he comes running up and he bows before Jesus, and he says, now who is more dangerous to whom in this situation? Right. The demons know. Jesus is the dangerous one in the situation, right? When we have the Spirit within us, who's more dangerous to whom? Right. He who is in you is more powerful than he who is in the world. Right. So, but we often don't act like that's true. And the man amongst the tombs comes running up, and we say, uh-oh, better run away. Jesus went into all sorts of synagogues to preach, and think what happens, right? Demons start talking to him from within the people in these pews. Now, are those healthy synagogues that he's going into that are filled with possessed people? Those are not healthy synagogues. You don't have a bunch of possessed people in your synagogue if you're preaching the word faithfully and consistently, right? But Jesus goes in and he picks up the scroll and he begins to preach, and demons start talking to him from within he's wandering around Israel, and it's mostly Jews that are possessed by demons. So it's not a and he's much more dangerous to the darkness. The gospel is much more dangerous to the darkness than the darkness is ever dangerous to us.
I'm going to steal that. So here's what I want to get at, though. I want to get at the fact that the identities and markers that we're making in Christendom are so arbitrary at the end of the day. Right. So the reason that we're having our problems with identity as it relates to the culture is because of some of our arbitrary tribal identities we have inside of Christendom that we haven't, I know I'm hearing people say, yeah, but you have conferences and you got Sproul there that's here, and you got these guys here, and they're all fellowshipping together. But part of it sounds like 1 of your 3, where it's like there's a fellowship there without having the convictions as prevalent. I remember there's one debate, and everybody talks about it. There's one baptism debate with John MacArthur and R.C. Sproul, and that's like everybody's favorite. And now we have a debate. I think James White's coming out here to have a debate with Doug. I think on the 22nd of next month, is it?
About baptism?
It's on Paedo Communion.
Oh, Paedo Communion. Interesting.
Right. But so they're having a debate on it. They can seem to have this debate on it. But what I'm talking about is the fact that if you say in evangelicalism, especially Reformdom, that you're for paedo communion, you're almost a heretic, because the way that they understand the table and the way that you understand the table sets you guys almost at complete odds of what the table is. And since the table is so important and we must fence it, they have to fence it now from you. Right? They're
Right.
fencing it from you, and not just you, but now you and your kids. And so, you know, it create there's things that seems like we have to work through and work out as it relates to our different tribes inside of evangelicalism, that God is almost using now for. I've watched people come closer together where some of that stuff doesn't even matter hardly at all, but where I think some people are understanding why, and seeing the side, like, oh, I see why you do that. Okay, I still haven't come to that conviction yet, but Jason, I'm telling you, like, people at churches would absolutely have a fit if my children came to their church and somehow they took communion, right? I know people who are at churches who are Christians, they're Presbyterians, but because they haven't been baptized in the mold that this church believes is the right way, they can't even take communion.
Right. And that's when it's become a tribal marker rather than a
Yeah,
super identity marker.
but they would say, no, man, this is a biblical conviction marker. Not just a tribal marker. This is a biblical conviction marker on what baptism is, and then what happens. And if you haven't been properly baptized, how do you get the table? So when we're talking about identity, man, it's funny that this is really it's funny. The Trinity and the table, to me, are the primary markers for identity. Right. And we haven't worked out with brothers how to have this. We talk about social justice. We can talk about all these other transgenderism. We can talk about all these other forms of identity and markers that people have out there. But if we're having problems at the table with each other, we have some home cleaning to do.
Yeah. Where there's a couple of things, right? One of the marks of heresy is that it divides God's people, right? That's one of the central meanings of the word heresy, is division, right? It's something that divides God's people. So I do think that there is a fundamental heresy that has infected the American church, and the evidence of it is the divisions, right? So working backwards from the fact that we're divided, there must be a fundamental heresy somewhere underneath there, right? Now, what it is
oh my God, what are you about to say?
What it is something that we should talk about and try and figure out together.
Heretic. Burn them, tar and feather them, and then burn them again.
I honestly think that Gnosticism is that underlying heresy, right? I think that we've got this underlying heresy and that's the reason we're separated out from one another, right? And you can see it in the way the beginning of the Bible is dealt with. You can see it in the way that the creation narrative is dealt with, that somehow the history, it's not important that it's history, right? It's not important. You can see now in the way people are dealing with that they don't know what to do about somebody that claims a different identity than their biological identity, a different gender than their biological identity, and Christians say, I don't know how to answer that. Right.
Well, I mean, they're acting like they do, though. I mean, they're coming out with like, well, that God made you a man, so act like a man.
So I think they're starting to now. When it first started, it was crickets, right? Because they didn't know the answer. But God is pressing on our Gnosticism from the outside, right? So I think God is saying, hey guys, wake up, look at this. And he's pressing on our Gnosticism from the outside, and he's doing the thing where he's carving some of the people that we thought were of us away from us, because they're leaving us because they were never from us, right?
I'm sorry.
So
I translated that David French. Is that what you said? I'm sorry. Just
I actually I'm not. I've
I
heard
know
of David French, but I'm not familiar.
I know you don't know who that is. This is
Yeah.
why I said it.
But I think that you're starting to see people that you thought, wait, I thought they were on our side. This has the when the Gnosticism shows up so obviously, right? I now know that I am a woman, and they say you should probably be swimming with the women then. Like, what? You don't get to change your identity because of that. Like, that's not how nature works. And they're like, well, is it though? And you've got a bunch of Christians that are like, yeah, is it though? I mean, isn't that Christianity? Like, well, no, that's Gnosticism. And now we know that you are not, that you have never been of us because you went out from us, right? So God is putting pressure on the Gnosticism in order to reveal it. I hope. I mean, I think. I mean, I think he's in the restoration of the American church mode. I think we're going to look back and say, in 500 years, look back and say, oh, and then the Reformation started, right? And we're in the beginnings of it. And I think it's going to depend upon the technological communication revolution, just like the printing press. I think it's going to be international, just like the Reformation. I think we're in the beginning of a new Reformation.
Jason, I don't, we started doing this talk because I'm dealing with all these topics right now in what I do on a daily basis, weekly basis, going to other shows talking about just in the culture itself. We talk about critical theory, as we talk about Marxism, as we talk about, social justice. It is wokeness, wokeness is penetrated deep into evangelicalism. And, I always see this stuff on the surface and I'm like, this ain't the real problem. Like what you said when you talk about heresies, and I'm looking at this stuff, and as a theonomist, I look at this, I'm like, these are easy things for me to fix on the surface.
Right. On the surface.
Like, on the surface of all this, I got all the answers. Like, I mean, seriously, if you have been saturated in Song of Solomon, in Proverbs, in Deuteronomy, and Leviticus, in Genesis, you got this. Like, right. Seriously, that's not that hard. Like, if we just need somebody to make some rules, some laws, and to judge situations, that's good. When we talk about what's underneath this, the more that I've dug into this with you, I keep feeling like what's underneath it, it's way more local to the church and doctrinal. Yeah. And the main things not being the main things. And I'm not trying to cover up anything, but I just feel like, if I said it before, there is every time we talk, it always comes back to the Trinity and the table. The Trinity and the table. And as I look at the table and the fellowship that we don't have as Christian brothers that we should have in the table, because we are, and I'm not trying to, I know that we all have convictions about how we look at the table, and I don't want to get rid of those convictions, but then those convictions excommunicado in a lot of ways brothers from the table. And there's some people do need to be excommunicated because they're not right. But then we don't know where those lines or margins are. And there was are we making them up arbitrarily? Do we need a new counsel on how to deal with this? Because I think if we don't get that right as it relates to unity, then what we end up getting on what unity looks like is like what just happened inside of conservatism recently, where you have David Rubin and his longtime sodomite partner adopting 2 babies. And then a form of conservatism comes behind it and says that it's supposed to be influenced by Christianity, right? That's supposed to be the religion of conservatism. Says, congratulations, you guys. Oh, wow, 2. And I saw PragerU, which is a huge proponent of conservatism. And I saw The Blaze, and then I'm seeing this praise of this, and I'm saying, and then evangelicals, some of them stood up and was like, wait a second, right? But they have no problem having a certain form of unity with conservatism that they don't have. There's a table there too, right? There's a table there too, right? And so, but we don't see it like that. But then they have almost more camaraderie in some ways and willing to join hands with people in a certain way, but that they're not willing to have other brothers who they're closer with at the table.
Right.
And so I feel like and I haven't this, this is me just talking to you and people just getting to hear a conversation I'm having with you as I'm thinking out loud.
It's
I don't want to let go of those convictions. And at the same time, I don't want to hold them to the point where they excommunicate people who have actually been justified.
Right. But and this is where it comes down to who's your scapegoat, right? Because who's the scapegoat of the conservatives? It's the left. It's the leftists. It's the communists. It's whoever. That and
somebody to hate, right?
Somebody to hate together. And because the church has not, in general, done a good job of gathering around us Jesus because we love him and being in true fellowship because of love. Because remember, one of the marks of the church, they will know you by your love, right?
Have for one another, yeah.
We have not done a good job of believing that conviction and preaching the gospel in such a way that conviction becomes truth and reality of the experience of people. They can't tell the difference between going to church and we are right because we're not Roman Catholics and we are right because we're not leftists at the political rally. It's the same kind of fellowship so often that it feels Christian. Right. Because it's the same kind of fellowship that I have at the church.
Because we have the same because we all share the same scapegoat in politics, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, we share the same scapegoat in politics. We hate the same thing. We hate the same thing. It's easier to stand up and preach against somebody else's theology than to declare the gospel, because you'll get a quicker community around that than you will and you'll get a more respectable community, right? You get a really unrespectable community if you just preach the gospel.
But no, that's right. That's what I've seen happen a lot with Doug, which is what the scandal of it, right? But I think too, what people think that they're doing is preserving the message that's been given when they are pointing and preaching against other folks who are enemies of the gospel. So they'll see charismatics who are falling out in spirit. I mean, and people who are inside, they would, and there is some crazy messed up people out there on the up. I mean, absolutely. And then there's some who just haven't been discipled well, right? And there's a tendency to lump all those people in together, which is not fair, I don't think at all. But there is a purifying effect that they are trying to do in preserving the gospel, and so that's why they preach against.
Yeah. So, the way that I've come to think about it is there's a way to preach against, and then there's a way to preach with a foil. Right? A foil is something that is not true that helps you see the truth. Right? It's a literary device. FOIL, foil. You can use something. Say, well, here's the falsehood. And what it does is you use the falsehood to show the truth, to clarify, to make it clearer what the truth is. There's a way to do that is really useful. And there are people that see people do that. And then they say, look what was so powerful about that. He preached against this. He preached against that. Right. And they never get around to preaching the good news. They preach against the bad news instead of in favor of the good news, or against false gospels instead of preaching the gospel. And there are preachers that use false gospels really effectively as foils. It's a skill. It's an art. And there are a lot of preachers that never get around to preaching the good news. They just preach against the false gospels all the time. And a lot of times they're the ones that are loudest declaring, anyone who preaches any other gospel, let him be damned, let him be forsaken, and whether an angel in heaven, whether, you're like, okay, that's true. I believe that. You haven't yet preached the gospel to me. What's the gospel? Not believing in the false gospels? Is that the good news?
There's something. Yeah, I know. My face is looking some type of way right now. Yeah, because I guess part of this
you finally got me out of my shell. I'm actually communicating my frustrations now.
is that what's going on.
That's what's going on.
Yeah, there's I guess some of this has been so long of what I've experienced evangelicalism as that, this is probably what's gotten me since just to be straight up, since I moved to Moscow, the last 9 years has been a different kind of Christianity that I've ever experienced before. And it's the kind of Christianity that I've seen that is building something. It's building people. I'm watching a community, develop on a local level in ways that I haven't really seen, have impact on national level. I'm watching that spread to other places and people doing it too. I'm just watching, and I think one of my friends says, I'm seeing the kingdom of God actively engaged in the world right here and now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing it happening in little pockets. I'm watching, and it's been interesting to see something being built with a large form of ecumenism that usually isn't tolerated inside of evangelicalism.
Right.
And seeing that is what I'm saying we have to have if we're going to win. People can come together for war, but coming together for war to beat the social justice movement isn't what's going to beat it.
Right. No. You have to be together in times of peace to be able to do that.
Yeah. That's what I mean by the table. Like the table is if we can't come together around that to build the kingdom here, right? As the kingdom is being the leaven in the loaf, right? It's rising. It's almost like we keep like that table though. That's where we eat. That's where we come together, and the separation there. And at baptism, if we and I'm not saying people have to be Presbyterian. I'm never saying that.
Yeah, right.
I'm not saying I'm never saying that at all. What I'm trying to fight for is the unity beyond some of those distinctives that would normally try and separate us. And I'll say everybody's like, we got the gospel,
yeah.
But then we will let people who have the gospel won't be able to come to the table.
Right. But so here's the thing. Since you've cracked open the jar and it's leaking anyway, I'll just spill it all over. So there's a lot of folks that have tried to take this external moment at what is happening in Moscow and try to pick up the externals and drop them into their situation and recreate them. And they don't realize that before Doug got there, his dad was preaching the gospel there for a generation.
Facts. Right. That's true. Right.
And then they don't take what is at the heart of everything that Doug does. I remember him preaching through the book of Deuteronomy when I was first brand new baby. So this is 20 years ago. We're there, and him preaching about God's love, saying God has already done everything that's needed to be done because he sent his son Jesus, and now he's trying to feed you. Why do you keep your mouth shut? God has grace and mercy overflowing for you. Right? He's just so Doug preaches the overwhelming, overflowing mercy, love, and grace of God. Right? I remember him standing up there once, just repeating, grace, grace, grace. It's all grace. Grace, grace, grace. It's all grace. And one of you is going to come up to me afterwards and say, but is it by something else? The answer will be no. It's grace, grace, right? It's up there, and he's and so then you pick up his books on marriage and you read them in the context of his preaching of the overwhelming, overflowing love and grace of God revealed to us in Christ Jesus, accomplished for us on the cross, applied to us by the Spirit. And you read his books about marriage in that context, and you're like, these are so wonderful. They're so full of grace. And people pick them up and they're like, I got the new rule book, and then go around
Right.
whacking people with it. It's
That's
like
right.
at the heart of all of it is multiple generations of really strongly convicted gospel preaching. Um, and it's not something that you can, if you try to pick up the externals and drop it someplace else, you're gonna get something monstrous, right? You're gonna get because you're gonna get a haunted building that because you're not cleansing the the spirits. You end up with 7 spirits worse than the first, and I mean it's
You're really hitting that. I'm glad you said that because when you go back and listen, if anybody who's done any of the research, Jim Wilson, gospel preaching,
dude, gospel preaching, gift of evangelism, turning the world upside down everywhere
his
he
book on
goes.
bitterness. I didn't know I
Yeah.
didn't know I had bitterness.
Life changing.
Until I read that book on bitterness.
Changing.
And all it was just the gospel pointed the direction of my bitterness.
Right.
And I had, but that's what I'm.
Yes, his book, The Principles of War.
Oh,
right.
That's what it
brilliant,
is.
right?
Yeah.
It's brilliant. Where it's just, how do you preach the gospel here? How do you preach the gospel there? What does it look like to preach the gospel here? Right? It's so good. What do you do if they won't let the gospel in? Right? And he's got a whole chapter on. Well, you sit and pray. Said it's like sending in the planes with bombs beforehand. You just sit and you pray until finally they let you in. Like, oh, that's what it's like, right? I mean, life transforming stuff, and he'd been doing it for a generation, and then Doug accidentally ends up a pastor in his wake.
Do you think that this has to be because I guess it's all for me anyway? But this is a question. Do you think that it's just when we were talking at the beginning of this and we're talking about the whole situation and the gospel being scandalous, do you think it's just too simple and not and we've sanitized so it's not dangerous enough? Because if again, I don't want to put these two things at odds, but there is this kind of protection of the gospel that we want to have where it's very sanitized and clean and looks nice and all dresses up in a suit and so it doesn't ever, but the gospel is an oil worker.
Yeah, we spend our time trying to shine up and protect the gospel when it's our armor.
And here's what I have. Here's what I have in the back of my head, though. So then, when you have stuff like this, and you have these animosities that are there, I'm trying to take and put this on. I'm seeing the conflict of our fellowship with each other as Christians, and the conflict with how we then deal with Christianity in the world. And right now, there isn't anything different per se, practically how we're doing those things. And I'm saying there should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
There should be way more. And I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but the fact that we're having such a hard time dealing with animosities around the issue of race is a bigger problem than that's on surface. That's a surface issue. That's a surface issue. And when Paul goes to deal with this stuff, he deals with, I always tell people, it's like, okay, so you got the Jewish women, or you got the women in Acts, I think it's Jewish Hellenistic women, right? Was it?
Yeah.
They're not getting food. Nobody's being considerate of them. It could be racial animosity, things since they're Hellenistic, it was obviously something that was going on because it's brought up, right? It's clear. And so you could have anybody thinking about them. You have people who have been born again, who are Christians, and they're not thinking about their brothers or sisters. And then they bring this complaint then to the prophets and the apostles. And like, the apostles are like, this ain't it. For us to get involved, are you serious? This issue? It ain't for us to stop doing what we're doing. We're proclaiming the gospel to solve this problem. Go get some deacons.
Right.
Holy men from among you who can put this whole situation to rest and care for everybody and bring you guys together in unity. And I keep wondering, okay, where's the deacons?
Right.
Where's the
Yeah. Come in and say, hey man, we got this racial animosity going on, and we're like, drop everything. We're going to address this. This will be the thing that we talk about for the next 2 years.
We got our best guys on it right now, Jason. You know what I mean? We got our best guys.
and it ends up worse than it began. Facts. Right? Like the racial animosity is worse now than it ever was. Right now, there's more racial tension than there ever was, and I do think it's because our gospel preachers walked away from gospel preaching in order to fix the world's problems. And what the gospel puts things right. I'm talking about the world's the problem, the problems the world says it has. So that's not how we decide what problems need fixing.
But then the other side of it is that we've had people that have proclaimed the gospel and not applied it to the problem.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So then they got this gospel preaching going on, like we were talking about early. Don't steal, don't steal, don't steal, don't steal. Right. Listen, don't cut the end of the log off of your neighbor of the log coming down the chute. What? Listen, you go back to preaching, thou shalt not steal. So we've kind of had the other way where people's like, everybody's worried about the law, but nobody's worried about what's the standard, and then how do you apply that standard to where we're currently at? Is gospel preaching?
It is, right? But there's a relationship between the gospel and the law that we have severed. Right? We want to say that the law comes and brings conviction, and then the gospel comes and brings relief. But we've forgotten that then the law comes and gives us content for our love. But we're not known as loving communities, partly because we haven't let the law inform the content of our love, or we haven't let the law of God come in and tell us, what does love look like? What does love mean? Because we're afraid of the law. Right? We're afraid of the law. But perfect love is supposed to have cast out fear. So if we're preaching the gospel, we shouldn't be afraid of the law anymore. Our relationship with the law is shifted and changed. Our relationship with the law is renewed back to its original purpose. It's supposed to come in and give us the content of our love. But we're still afraid of the law, which means we're not preaching the gospel. There's something missing from our gospel presentation. I'll put it that way. Right? If it doesn't end up casting out fear, if we still are afraid of the law, if we're still looking for ways that we're afraid that the law might be sneaking its way back in, then we're not preaching the full gospel. So it's a gospel preaching problem that we've got. We live in churches void of the gospel.
That's a horrible way to end a conversation.
But that's go listen to the Trinity part again.
There you go. Just stop it halfway. I feel like I got to run here, but I'm not satisfied yet with. Maybe it's because the answer is simpler than I think, but we were talking about this last time. The way that Calvin understood the table, the way we understand the table, there's this huge gap in what it is. I mean, here's a great example, Jason. What does it profit a church now to excommunicate somebody? Because the strongest thing that they have is not excommunicating them from the church fellowship. That's not what excommunication is. It's being cut from the table.
Right.
But if churches only are having communion once a month, And there is no high value of what the table actually is. It's would it be fair to say it's ontological reality?
Well, it's I mean, I think
What would you call it? It's
it's
metaphysical
it's
reality.
um it's economic. I mean, it's economic function in our lives. Like we don't believe it does
There we go.
anything.
Right,
Yeah.
right. The economic, that's a great word. Thank you. The economic function that it has in our lives and in the culture,
Mm-hmm.
right? If it doesn't, how would you say? If it's not actually a means of grace that does something, then who cares that you get cut from it?
Right.
I'll just go to a different church now. Or, there isn't any, I'm not missing it that much once 4 times, 12 times a year. Okay, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we have done is we have restructured the gospel or reinvented the gospel into a series of ideas that can go that lodge into our heads. And so a person's cut off from the community, but they've still got the ideas in their heads and they take them with them. Right. So there's no longer a, um, so now the table is meaningless. Right. And this is the thing that, um, when we talk about severing, preaching the gospel in such a way that it no longer touches down, or it's not even really the gospel. It's because we've separated it from history. We've separated it from the story. It doesn't make any difference in our lives if it's something that lodges in our head, right? Whereas if you preach the gospel, it changes the world. It changes our relationship with creation. It changes our relationship with one another, right?
It
It
has
changes
metaphysical
our
realities to it. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So suddenly, uh, the table is gospel shaped, right? And a well constructed liturgy is gospel shaped. A good hymn is gospel shaped, right? All of these things become reinforcements of God's actions in history to rescue us from our sin and rescue us back into history, back into the story. So where we were kicked out of the garden before and we didn't have access to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and we didn't have access to the tree of life, right? We the well now suddenly we have access to the bread and the wine now, right? We have access to be fed by God, right? We have, and Jesus says, "And this is my body." Now he's talking poetically, metaphorically, spiritually. All it doesn't ontologically shift. What it is, but it it is God feeding us, right? It is God drawing us to Himself and giving us, returning our access to eat food with Him. But that's what the tree of life was supposed to be, right? Food with God. That's what everything in the garden was. It was food with God. All of a sudden, our food is not food with God anymore until He restores us to the table. Right? It's a family table. It's a reminder of our adoption, of our place. So it's so many things. That's the thing, is we always want to say,
Yeah,
here it is. It's this one thing or that one thing.
but it's touching everything.
Just everything. Yeah.
So then I guess, Jason, get everybody, man. I don't even know why I let people hear conversations that we're having, because this is really just for me. It really is. But I keep saying that. I hope people understand. Like, we're not trying to make a show. We're really just having a conversation so
Right.
Knox can work through some
Right.
things. So then the thing that I'm trying to work through is that we really, man, we have some foundational things to get back right in understanding of. I think understanding the gospel, and we were talking about a little bit this last week too, or last time we talked, to understanding the gospel in the same context as what was going on with Genesis. What is the gospel the good news of? And it's exactly what Eve was hoping for, and one of the things that she was trying to give birth to. One of the people she was trying to give birth to. Is this it, Lord? Is this it? Right? That Mary was the one who was able to say, "It's here." right? Everything that was supposed to come to bring restoration back to mankind that he had with God in the garden, right? That's what the gospel has done, right? It is
Right.
currently, and it's expanding it beyond, right? And so when we talk and we communicate the gospel, I think we have this um gospel that has redemptive work disconnected from history in one way or
Right.
another,
Right.
right?
Yeah. And that it somehow takes us out of history, removes us further from history, right? Rather than, um, eh, this is one of the reasons that it's dangerous in a certain sense to preach the gospel, because when people start getting saved, it's messy, but not just messy because messy people start bringing stuff in, but brand new Christians bring a perspective in, and they read the Bible and they look at it and they're like, hey, you know, you dance around this passage a lot, but it's just really straightforward. And I really want to know what it means. And I really want to obey it. And all of a sudden the pastor is reconfronted with things that he has theologically categorized away, right? As these
Mm,
aspects of the Bible, that this person now who's got the Spirit inside them brings a new voice that's, and and all of a sudden the Spirit starts convicting from this new convert, starts convicting places in the church, and we got to, we're always reforming. And so it's dangerous for everyone to preach the gospel, but it's dangerous in the right sort of way.
mm. We just made more problems.
It's what I do.
Yeah, I don't know if you solved any of the questions I have in my head. No, the reciprocity thing was really good though. Like reciprocating, because I think that's really helpful to understand how that works. Because so then you can tell though when you're trusting what Christ has done in um his work to reconcile us back to the Father, and he's made himself the scapegoat. And scapegoats, maybe that's a concept that we don't spend enough time thinking about, but scapegoats are what you look at to say it's good between us now, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Like something died, like Genesis again. We'll go back to Genesis.
Yep.
Something died, so it's good between us now, right? Yes, it's good, but it's not just that it's good, but now Christ comes in and says, and let me give you the Spirit so that this now relationship goes back and forth between us now. Not the anger, not the hate, but love is the thing that's reciprocated
Right.
between us. And so when you would think it seems so. I felt like we could have ended the conversation an hour and a half earlier if we would just said, "Hey," and this is what everybody does. Hey, just look to Jesus.
Right.
That's really the answer, right? But then people don't know what that means, though. They don't know what that. There's no. What do you mean, look to Jesus? And it's well, he really died. He really bore your sins, and so the way that you're getting treated by that other person, you can say, I know somebody who died for that. And so I'm going to look at that person through the scapegoat and treat them the way that Christ has treated me and give them that same type of love that I'm getting from Christ, right? And they're like,
Right.
it just seems so easy.
Right.
It
But
just seems so easy.
it absolutely messes with everything, because so much of the world and the systems of the world are built on a an expectation of reciprocation, right? If everything's built on it, you're messing with the foundation of society by returning love for evil. You're messing with the foundation of culture by returning love for evil, right? You're not messing, you're not just, it's not just a momentary thing. Like you're kicking at the rickety things that the world is built on, that the world systems are built on, right? We want to reform the world systems, right? In the social, this is something that I think the social justice movement gets right. The world systems need to be reformed. They're messed up. They've been purposefully built on a modernist foundation now for 150 years.
Facts.
Right? Of course, the world systems are messed up, but do we really think that a world system based on power that resulted in this needs just a different power? Like, it needs a new system based on power, right? No, you want to mess with the foundations of the world systems and rebuild them. Return love for evil and watch people. I mean, you're going to get you're going to get people that, I mean, Jesus even says that some people are going to respond like they smell something great, and some people are going to respond like it's the smell of death.
How,
Right?
Sway? How? Because I feel like that, and I'll give you a scenario. I feel, and this is me hearing other people communicate, is like I can point to legitimate situations where I should be further along in life, but because of the sin of others over time, space, and history, to my forefathers and to my people, we are not where we should be, and we're suffering every day because of it. I want some justice.
Right. And this is it's real. I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road, right? Because
Yeah.
can you say thank you for white people's blessings?
No.
Right. Yeah,
No.
exactly. Right. It's
Oh,
because you think,
wait. You want me to be thankful that they're blessed and I'm not?
not that you're not, right, but that's not how blessings function, right? So here's the other centrally important thing, right? If God is not triune, then we're dealing with a uh, a world in which you've got a limited amount of love and blessing. So that if one person gets it, then they had to take it from someone else. But if you have an infinite God that is overflowing out of a triune community of eternal love, then one person's blessing is not a threat to yours. And so you can say thank you for their blessings, even when you look at yours and say, I didn't get mine.
But I can't say thank you to their blessings when they're taking mine. I'm not blessed because of recently historical and current setups of the culture that don't allow for me to be blessed like that.
Right. But you want to flip over that system, right?
Absolutely.
Right. And because that system is based on exactly what you're talking about, is a dealing reciprocally with one another. Right. So it's a system that says, I can, you see this in sort of the philosophical justifications of slavery, where they say, well, look, they don't have the education that I have. I am in a position of more power than them. And so I can take, right, because I have received this, I can take that. Right. I have more power. I can take more power. I have more education. I should be in charge. I can oppress others because I've been lifted up. Right. That's a reciprocity situation. Right. They're not doing they're not saying, oh, I have received and it's a gift, I should give a gift. I've received as a gift from God, I should give what God has given to me. Right. So to continue to insist upon reciprocity is to say, I just want the system
to favor me.
to favor me,
So
right?
that I can take.
So that I can take. When in fact, what we should want is for the whole system to be overturned, for the whole system to be toppled, right? And because it's an unjust system, right? And, we want justice to flow down like water, right? And so not we want the injustice to face my direction. But how do you overturn a system? You refuse to enter into the reciprocity based on what they have done, and instead you say, what's God done for me? How can I do that for others?
And that's your message to black people.
That's my message to black people. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Overturn the whole system. Why
That's what we're
don't
trying to do. We shall overcome. Have you seen some of the marches? Were you here in 2020? Did you see what we did? I'm just saying.
But they're set. They want so little. I mean, that's the system. It's such a small ask of the Lord to say, can I just get my peace? Right? What you should want is for generations upon generations to not exist in a system like this. Right? You should want the system itself to be overturned so that when you're long forgotten, people are still blessed by a system that has been rebuilt upon a gift-giving, love-giving system.
Jason, you're hitting at something that I don't think that conservative Christians even like to talk about, and I think I want to hit this real quick, and we got to go because we're at 2 hours again. But what just happens? This is how our phone conversations go, so that's what we're doing. But we want to protect the system because we know they're coming to destroy the system. We know that there's a group of, and I'm not talking about black people, so just let me make it very clear. I'm talking about people who have a worldview antithetical to that of Christianity and want to topple the system because
that are putting pallets of bricks out for people to throw at Target.
Yeah, they want to topple the system so that they can recreate the system in the image of a false god. That's what they're after.
Yeah.
But there's a view from the other side that sees the system and says this system is Christian. Right? And this is as good as it can get. And so that's why when I talk about police reform, people are like, we don't need police reform. I'm like, you done lost your whole mind.
Right.
You done lost your whole. If you think this is what justice looks like, you don't know your Bible.
Right.
If you think that this is what I'm so grateful for the current system that we can have right now in America. It throughout history has been a massive beacon of light that has been a fruit of the gospel in so many ways, and yet this is not it. Right.
Well, we've had the leeches of Darwinism and Hegelianism attached to the system long enough to drain it right now. And then so we've got if you've got a system that's based so fundamentally on a Darwinian understanding, as Christians, we shouldn't trust it.
Well, and I'm just saying we can't act like we don't want. This is where your gospel has to meet the road. We can't act like we don't want to. There's Reformation and then there's revolution.
Mm-hmm.
We want the system to bow the knee too.
Right.
Right. And it will bow the knee as the gospel continues to permeate the lives of the people who are loving their husbands and wives and children, church, all that stuff. But we're not praising the system as if it's arrived. We are in this fight. If there's anything that we're having, we're in this race, in this fight, and we're seeing this other group trying to beat us to the punch to create a revolution while we're trying to reform. And we want to say, get back, because you ain't gonna mess up.
Yeah,
what God is doing through history and time.
We got reform to accomplish. Stop with your revolution.
That's exactly right. But instead, we come off like, oh no, we got this. It's so good, and it's like,
and I do think that there are Christians out there that are just trying to protect their own, and they've gotten their own moved into the wrong category, right? And so I've got a good. I don't want to change anything, but I mean, it was here's the thing that's crazy is it was conservative Christians that taught me that the police or that the prison system was messed up, right? And so when you had I'd heard about the messed up prison system for years and years from conservative Christians that couldn't get it onto the platform of the Republican Party to save their lives, right? They're talking about it and they're saying, hey, we should look at this. And I think that they did put their hope into a Republican Party platform rather than saying like, well, we can't get it on the platform, but we should talk about it anyway. Like, well, we can't get it onto the platform. We'll have to wait. Look at that. Yeah.
I was just on with Jason Whitlock when we were talking about this. So we were talking about Ron DeSantis, and I really have to go. But I was saying, everybody's mad right now what's happening with education and even in the world, in America. And I was like, you don't have to wait for your politicians to fix the problem.
Right.
You don't have to wait for Ron DeSantis to pass a bill with his Congress to fix the problem of having gay marches in schools in Florida. You don't have to wait for your politicians to fix the problem before the gospel can actually have a tangible work in the life in the community where you're at right now. You don't have to wait for them, right? Like that. We don't have to wait for our civil magistrates to fix the prison system.
Right.
Right. We don't have to wait for that. And that's one of the things that it's like, that Christian community, that Christian, we were talking about cookies the other day. We don't have to be ones that are acting in response to something.
Yeah.
We can be the ones that they are acting in response to us. How are Christians the ones dealing with education? Right.
And I mean, I think that is someplace where it's happening, right? You've got now,
now
you've got Christian schools leading the way in a way that they weren't before. But we should be leading the way in all sorts of reforms, but we got to get our house in order for that to work. I mean, that's the reality. We got to get that. We got to get the word and the sacrament being preached and practiced, and I think the church discipline functioning the way it should, and so that we become a community that's known for loving one another.
I think we scare people when we start talking about that table, though. I really do. I think that the last thing that some people want to do is like, wait a second, man. I don't know if I can let these people who, not just table, but membership at churches. I think there's a large group of our Reformed circles. I don't think it's so bad with Baptists who are not Reformed, but I think it's more inside the Reform, more of our staunchy areas and circles where it's like, I don't know if I can let these people who serve in different mode or different theological tradition than I do actually be members at my church or have communion at my table. If they're going to be members of my, I think there's this, we have to figure out how to mature to a place where we can hold all that together because of justification. Right. Because not in spite of it. Right. Right. Because of
where we believe that true sanctification flows out of justification.
Yep, exactly. All right. I got to run, man.
All right.
I appreciate you, dude. We'll holler.